So in September, I did quite a bit of traveling. I went to Croatia earlier on in the month, and then I spent the last week of the month in Italy. And going into September, like, I just knew that I wasn't going to be doing a lot of reading. What I didn't expect was that I wasn't also going to enjoy the majority of the books that I read, which is unfortunate because a lot of them, all of them actually, would have been, I would say, 5-star predictions for me. So that makes it hurt just a little bit more. The good news is that I'm already doing much better in October, so my October wrap up is going to be much more promising, and I can say that already at this point of the month. But getting into the stats for those September reads, in the month of September I read 2,228 pages across 3 books, which broke down to an average of 68 pages per day. For the ratings, I had 1 2-star, 1 3-star and 1 4-star, breaking down to an average of 3 stars per book, which is much lower than my typical, which tends to be around a 3.6. For the demographics, all 3 of the books I read were adult. For the formats, I read 2 standardly formatted novels and 1 e-arc. For the genres, I read 2 fantasy and 1 fantasy romance. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, one of them I had hauled in 2023, one of them was from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2023, and one of them was sent to me by the author. So I kicked off the month with one of my most anticipated releases of the year. The release date for this was supposed to be the beginning of October, which is why I prioritized it for the beginning of September, but it actually ended up being pushed back, I think, to the middle of November right now, and that is Endless Terrors by KJ Sutton. So this one is book 5 in one of my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. I'm good friends with the author Kelsey. I visited her in July and she sent me the e-arc of Endless Terrors. Now, if you are unfamiliar with this series, is the Fortuna Swan series, and we're following a girl called Fortuna who is a nightmare. Now, this is a paranormal creature that has the ability to sense what your greatest fear is and to make you believe that you are experiencing it. So the nightmares are actually a dying breed, and Fortuna's brother went missing 2 years prior to the start of this story. She has searched for him relentlessly without finding a single trace, up until the point where she's about to give up hope and she's approached by a very powerful fairy male who tells her he not only knows where her brother is, but he will take her directly to him, providing that she marries him. So it has a lot of fae in it. I always call it a fairy romance, but there are other paranormal creatures in there as well. The plot has moved on quite a lot from that original setup. We have more like mythological, folkloric creatures, and also creatures of legend in here. Like Dracula makes an appearance. There's also the Wild Hunt. We have shifters, there's witches, necromancers, and a whole host of other creatures. This is the book that I gave 4 stars to. I'm not sure if I've ever given a Fortuna book less than 5, but this one introduced a new character and kind of took us to a different place than we are familiar with in the Fortuna series. Because such a long part of this book, like such a big part of this book, took place in this entirely new location with this entirely new character, setting up like a different branch of the plot or establishing a different branch of the plot. While I really enjoyed this book, a lot of it didn't feel like a Fortuna novel because we were missing a lot of the core cast of characters and a lot of the like familiar settings of the Fortuna Swan series. Something that I really love about this series is that Kelsey doesn't really pull her punches. This series will pull at your heartstrings. The characters are taken to rock bottom time and time again, and we also have like epic plot twists, epic betrayals in here, and this was definitely no different. There was something very pivotal that we found out at the end of this book that I'm very interested to see how that is going to develop into book 6. It surrounds a character that I've always been a little bit sus about, but I did not see this coming, so I really like how that developed and what it means for the series as a whole. Fortuna herself has grown so much throughout this series as well. The things that I love about her the most is that she is incredibly stubborn and she's incredibly flawed. Like, you'll be screaming at her while you're reading this series because she's constantly making stupid decisions or decisions based on her emotions as opposed to, I guess, what logically would be best for her. And she still has the biggest heart. She still continues to follow that path. Like, she's grown so much in confidence, and along with that, her powers are also growing. And I really enjoy how the creatures and the magic in this series continues to progress and develop. Now, I don't actually know how big this book is because I had my EPUB was like 300 pages, but the print version on Amazon says that it's like 730. So it is a big book, and I will say, even though I only read 3 books in this month, the smallest was 620 pages. So while I didn't read the most books, I definitely still read a lot of pages. And I really like that the Fortuna books have like grown in size with each installment, because earlier on in the series I felt like we had a lot going on and there was a lot of plot and there wasn't enough necessarily like space within the page count to fully flesh these things out. And I do think that the pacing of book 4 and book 5 is pretty much on point, where we have these moments of high action but also slower moments in between of like reflection and character growth, and book 5 was definitely no exception in that regard. I'm really excited to see where book 6 takes this series and what happens, how it's going to wrap up. I'm praying for a happy ending for Fortuna. There are some poly elements to the relationships within this series, and I'm really excited to see how they are going to resolve as well. But of all of the love interests, I do have a favourite, and if nothing else, I would definitely like happiness for him at the very least. But I mean, there's no promises with Kelsey. Literally anything could happen. So the second book that I read was a gift from Hannah for my birthday, so thank you very much to Hannah. This is a book that I've been eyeing up for a long time and I had really high hopes for. Sadly, it wasn't for me though, and that is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. This was my group book for the Italy trip that I've just been on. I set us a group book to discuss while we were in Italy, and we sat at a cafe right next to the cathedral in Florence and discussed our thoughts and feelings on this one. I'm pretty sure that that was my first in real life book club experience, which was also really cool. But sadly, I didn't fall in love with this one like I wanted to, and it was so promising from the offset as well. So this one is actually by a writing duo. One of the authors is Marie Brennan, who is the author of the Natural History of Dragons series, which is another series that I have been interested in. However, after reading this, I believe that they're different, so I might still enjoy that. But I will say I'm not as enthusiastic about that series after reading this one. This one is an adult fantasy with a Venetian setting, and we are following a con artist called Ren. Now, she is trying to set up a better life for herself and for her sister, so she is trying to infiltrate a noble family, and she was a maid for a woman who has been estranged from this family. So she comes to the city and she meets up with the family members and tells them that she is the daughter of this estranged woman. Now, everyone's a little bit suspicious, but nobody's going to fact check her because they would literally rather do anything than talk to this estranged family member that they have. So Ren has to prove her worth to them, and she ends up embroiled in the politics of this city, where we have lots of feuding noble families to prove to this family that she is one of them and she is worthy of being one of them. Now, we do have dream magic in here as well. We also have a plot line where there is a like the equivalent of a police officer whose brother died in a fire, and there is a legendary figure in this world who is called the Rook, and he's kind of like a Robin Hood kind of figure, and he was blamed for the death of this police officer's brother. So the police officer is trying to figure out whether it was the Rook that was responsible or whether it was somebody else. Now, there is a lot going on in this series in a way that I couldn't really give you a concise description of the plot. All I can tell you is about the different elements that we have going on, because they all slowly start to weave together as the book continues. I really like the atmosphere and the writing of this starting out. From what I've heard of people who really like A Natural History of Dragons, Marie Brennan's writing style does tend to tip a little bit more towards the historical, and I definitely got that feeling in here. The world was very well thought out. We had like paragraphs and small tangents of description, like describing little bits about like the society and the architecture that technically don't really matter in terms of the plot, but really like flesh out this world. The setting and the atmosphere of this, with it being a Venetian style setting, I also really enjoyed at the start of this one. But my issue with it, the reason why this did end up being a 3-star for me, is because the more I got into this book, I realized that I just wasn't really developing any attachments to to any of the characters, and I also wasn't really getting invested in the plot. I feel like the plot is too slow in progressing, it stays too ambiguous for too long, and so I never got to a point where like I was really immersed in the story that was happening here with zero attachment to the characters. I do also feel like this book does a lot of telling and not showing, and something that I discovered especially with reading this book is that I like books where my brain is working. It's why I really enjoy the experience of reading thrillers, even though I don't read the most, because I am always trying to work out the plot twist. And it's also the reason why I love authors like Sanderson, because they lay out the breadcrumbs for you. So if you were clever enough, you can figure out the plot twist for yourself. And in this, I just felt like my brain wasn't active enough. I didn't feel like the authors were giving me any crumbs, giving me any clues, but I was starting to become like an active participant in this plot. I was just kind of waiting for information to be told to me, and I just don't think that that type of storytelling is to me, and it's something that I've only kind of really realized as I was reading this one. I am really upset about it because this is a book that I've seen and I do see in Waterstones all the time. I think it has a stunning cover, it always draws my eye, I was always intrigued. So after finally getting the chance to read this and not loving it, I am pretty sad about it, especially because there are a lot of people who love this series, but sadly I just don't think it's one for me. And my last read was also a huge disappointment because I thought that I was really going to enjoy this. I've previously given a book by this author 5 stars, but sadly this one is my 2-star read of September, and that is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the first standalone in the First Law universe, but it is, if you're reading the entire universe in order, it is book 4. And this one is a revenge plot following Mons Cara. I think her full name is Mons Cara Mercato, but she goes by Monza. And in the prologue of this book, she is betrayed by the band of mercenaries that she leads. She works for the Duke of Talons and he orders her death. So her mercenary band turn against her and they kill her brother and try to kill her. So this book is formatted as a revenge plot, kind of like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones, where she has a list of people who played a part in this betrayal that she is trying to kill. Now, throughout the course of this story, she joins up with some new characters who are going to join her on her mission because she's going to pay them very well to do so, including a poisoner. We also have a Northman that we have met in the first trilogy, and a couple of other characters that we may be familiar with from the first 3 books. So I typically love a revenge plot. I liked the First Law trilogy. I actually really enjoyed it. I didn't necessarily love how it ended, but I really loved Joe Abercrombie's writing style. This is a grimdark fantasy. Some of the characters we follow in the First Law in general is like a torturer. We have a lot of politics. We follow like kings, dukes, northern barbarians. We have a whole host of characters from a whole host of backgrounds, but it does get pretty dark. It does get pretty bloody in places. And Joe Abercrombie's writing style is slightly humorous in a way that I was worried about when I first got into the First Law, but I actually found out that for the most part, I don't love the sex scenes, but for the most part, his humor actually works for me. But for some reason, there was just nothing about this book that I could get into. The writing was not engaging me, the plot line wasn't engaging me, and I really feel like it should have done, especially because we had this quite linear structure of ticking each person that Monza was trying to kill off this list. We also had some slight romance elements, although I wouldn't say it was like romantically written, but the relationships that were forged and the way that they developed through to the events in this book were kind of interesting. The only real potential reason I feel, for not getting into this is that we were introduced to a bunch of new characters that I didn't necessarily gel with. I also thought that the introduction of them at the beginning was quite rapid, and then we very quickly got into scenes that I felt were quite dialogue heavy, where we had a lot of back and forth between the characters, and I didn't feel like at that point early in the story the characters were established enough for me to properly follow along with that. While I did not enjoy the reading experience of this pretty much at all, there was not much that I enjoyed about this book. I did really like the end because as the story progresses, we kind of found out that there were more connections with characters than we maybe originally thought. Characters that we thought were new to this story potentially are not and may have a bigger part to play in an overarching plot. And as those reveals were coming through, even though I wasn't the most engaged with this story as I was reading it, I really enjoyed seeing those connections and kind of like linking them back to other things and things from the First Law trilogy. So I'm interested to see what part this book plays in the First Law universe as a whole, but this book for me was just not, it just wasn't enjoyable. A lot of people have very mixed feelings about First Law so far, including like the hosts of Catch Up Book Club, and it was really interesting because I had high hopes for this because a ton of people were saying that they were really enjoying it, even people who hadn't enjoyed the original trilogy. But for me, sadly, it was a bit of a miss, and I'm a little bit worried now because while I do still very much have interest in the second trilogy in the First Law world, this one had the most interesting synopsis of all of these standalones, because the next one is the tale, I think it's just one battle told from multiple different perspectives, and the one after that is a western. And let me tell you, the synopses of those two books do not sound especially promising, but who knows? I've been wrong before. I've liked things that I didn't think I was going to, so fingers crossed that's the case in this instance. So those were the 3 books that I read in September. Not a great reading month, but it was very much anticipated, at least in the volume of books that I read. Definitely not the ratings. I definitely expected to rate all of these a lot higher than I did. But the good news is that October is already looking up. I've had a pattern for a while, especially with like the plans that I've had going on through the year, where I have a pretty bad reading month followed by an amazing reading month. August was my best reading month ever, and so far in October I have already read 2 books, and I am a quarter of the way through a book that is almost 1,000 pages. So October is definitely, fingers crossed, going to be a much more, I mean, I'm definitely going to read more than 3 books for sure. I would be very surprised if I didn't manage to finish another book in the 27 days that we have left of October. So do stay tuned if you are at all interested in that. It is the month of Spookopoly, the Spookoplathon as well, which is definitely motivating me more because I'm rolling as I go, so I'm always excited to roll for my next prompt, and I definitely think that that is going to contribute to an excellent reading month. Shame about September though. In the comments, do let me know if you enjoyed any of these books and what you thought of them. Aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.